Hello, my name is Sarah Motta, and I'm coming to you from an estuary point in the city of Newcastle in New South Wales, where the Awabakal and Worimi lands meet at the meeting place of salt and fresh water. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emergent, and give my honouring to any other Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or Indigenous peoples who are present in the circle of this presentation. I'm going to be talking a little bit about a piece which is emergent from long-standing relationships of decolonising forms of research practice as healing and as decolonisation of self, other, and our possibilities of Black liberation in Cali, Colombia. And in particular, I'm going to talk a little bit, because there's not enough time, I don't think. I'm not sure, the strange COVID times, about the Escuela Política de Mariposas de Nuevas, which is actually in Buenaventura, which is about an hour and a half from Cali, in the Valle del Cauca. Sorry, I keep sneezing. Which is the political school of butterflies of new wings. And I'm going to talk a little bit about an initial conceptualization of this practice and the practice of the Circulo de Hombres, which I can send you paper about this if you'd like to read further about this. Who are based in Cali and who also are developing a decolonial feminisms. Because of the time, I think I'll just talk about the Escuela Política in Buenaventura. And I'm going to begin with a canto shamanico, the Ícaro, which was sung to open a workshop run by this political school of Afro and Indigenous women from Buenaventura and the region. And it's a school against violences, and violence is understood in a very broad way. So I'm going to read you the canto. Ábrete corazón, ábrete sentimiento, ábrete entendimiento. Deja a un lado la razón colonizada y deja brillar el sol escondido en tu interior. Ábrate memoria antigua, escondida en la tierra, en las plantas, en el aire. Recuerda lo que aprendiste bajo agua, bajo fuego, hace ya mucho tiempo. Ya es hora, sí, ya es hora. Abre la mente y recuerda, como el espíritu cura, como el amor sana, como el árbol florece y la vida perdure. So this political school emerges from an experience of political and epistemological non-being, which is characterized by this kind of fissure, rajadura, as Gloria Anzaldúa calls it, between visibility, invisibility and hyper-visibility. So these communities and these women by the state and capital and power are often viewed as delinquent, underdeveloped, violent, absent, kind of in their capacity to mother well, and are therefore cast with the gaze of hypervisibility, where they are legitimately intervened upon by forces of the state to dispossess them from their lands and to assassinate them if they contest and defend their lands. They are also cast with a gaze of invisibility, and invisibility onto epistemological terms, so negated as knowing being subjects with wisdoms, with knowledges, with anything to contribute to the dialogue of civilization and modernity in contemporary Colombia. And it is from this context, which mirrors itself then in the intimacies of everyday life, through the reproduction of the internal colonization of their relationships and communities with this logic of invisibility and hypervisibility through forms of intimate violences and gendered violences, which mirror the kinds of violences that are occurring in their lands as an alliance of multinationals, state and federal governments, and allies such as the United States come together to legitimize a peace process which actually is premised upon the continual dispossession of Afro and Indigenous communities from their territories and from ways of life and ways of knowing being. And so the way in which this school emerges is very much as a result of this compounding and complex experience as racialized and feminized subjects of this denial of being, of these continual violent interventions understood as a complex form of violence. And so a lot of their understanding of violence is also multidimensional. So when they are contesting and politicizing gendered forms of violence, they directly link that to this expanded sense of violence and do not turn it merely into a behavioral or individualizing framing of why there are forms of violence that crisscross their community, and how they are linked to systemic and systematic forms of the negation of political being and reason. So as emergent from this experience of denial of political being and reason, they also return to the territories of the body and the land as fonts of knowing and as fonts of reason, and embrace and combine multiple traditions of radical education emergent from those really strong traditions of popular education which are in this region and which I and others have written quite a lot about, to bring to visibility kind of pedagogical practices of learning, unlearning and relearning, which are actually at the central of the formation of new emancipatory subjects, visions and possibilities, but which often are sidelined in mainstream and critical framings of political subjectivity and the construction of emancipatory politics. And so they combine really rich traditions of popular education, feminist traditions of pedagogy, black feminist, indigenous feminist, non-violent forms of feminism. And they do this in a way that really centers the knowledges of the embodied or the enfleshed. So they begin from the stories of participants, and the stories of participants are told in multiple ways. So there's kind of an embrace of multiple forms of knowledge and multiple subjects who create knowledge, and also ways in which the creation of knowledge itself is transformatory. So not only in the piece of artwork or the mandala that's created, or in the story that's told, or in the strategy to defend or care for somebody who's been violated that's developed, but also in the very process of coming to tell stories and coming to a form of political reconocimiento, of recognition in the kind of Fanonian sense as beings, as subjects with wisdom and knowledges. And so these stories can be told in the form of chants, in the form of ritual, in the reconnections to ancestors, in the return to the healing of the traumas that crisscross the body as a result of these complex traumas. So the chant that I began with really calls to presence a non-colonized forms of reason, and really embeds that within connection to, here we'd say, country, to Madre Tierra, to the ancestors and ancestralidad, and to the elementales of water, fire, earth and air, and the telling of stories and myths and symbolism that are able to speak the unspeakable of experiences of both structured and systematic violence and also everyday violences, and also recover and recuperate resiliences, resistances, and hidden wisdoms from the ancestors. So within this process of kind of a dialogue of knowledges and a return to the word and to being of subjects who may well have been negated and kind of survivors of complex violences, the figure of the abuelas, the grandmothers, is actually quite key. This is something when I was writing this piece and when I kind of talked about it with some of the compañeras y compañeros from Cali and from the movements, wasn't as obvious. And then I was kind of looking through some interviews and looking through some other discussions that we had, and I saw that the abuela, the grandmothers, come up really clearly. And the abuelas here are kind of both real grandmothers, but also kind of ancestral figures of the grandmothers. And it's a sense in which in the workshops that are undertaken, whilst there is engagement with, radical law work in terms of struggles over rights, with the practices of other movements, with, knowledges of the body, so there's like massage and yoga and all different knowledges brought in to enable this coming to visibility in your own terms and as a mutual reconocimiento, there is also this return to ancestrality and to the abuelas and to the knowledges of the foremothers, and the knowledges not only of survival but actually knowledges of herbs and plants, and returning to the land to center and foreground the power of healing remedies, the power of women's knowledges in terms of self-care, in terms of healing from trauma, and in terms of enabling this articulation of voice in its multiple senses, through the occupying of space, through the decolonization of the territories of the body, through the speaking of word, through dance, through movement, through poetry, through chant, through ritual. So that's a really key figure that comes to me to talk about. And this kind of focus of speaking from this non-being, so speaking to rupture the containments and the framing of the politically possible and of modern subjectivity, means that you have to go beyond those logics and limits of reason and political subjecthood that characterize modernity, and move to the enfleshed, the embodied, the spiritual, the ancestral, and the more than human. It also means that the sense of decolonization, or the sense of the feminist liberation, takes seriously the internal territories of our subjecthood and our bodies, and brings that to as a central element in our healing liberations. This doesn't mean that external struggles over territory as land and livelihood are absent. Quite the reverse. These women are often at the forefront of defending their physical lands and of organising the women and the communities to ensure their survival and their livability, and in also beginning to politicise social reproduction, as we see across the continent, really strong in Argentina and Buenos Aires and Ni Una Menos, but present here as well in terms of how to ensure food production so that everyone can eat, how to ensure the care of children in forms that have always been transgressive of heteronormativity and nuclear families, and have always been extended, often women-head families, not as victims but as survivors and as wisdom keepers and other modalities and repertoires of care, and forms of ensuring housing and safety, both from attack by paramilitaries and parastate forces, but also by the everyday forms of gendered violence. So there is kind of a focus on inner and outer sovereignty, and the recuperation and the decolonization is sometimes used and sometimes not but a kind of defense and healing of and recuperation of territories, inner and outer. And so this is the short overview that I'm going to share with you today, with some of the key elements of some of the practice of this Afro and Indigenous women's political school found in Buenaventura, the speaking and visibility to rupture the dynamics of coloniality, of patriarchal coloniality, of invisibility and hypervisibility, and the coming to visibility in our own terms, the multiple forms of knowledge that this involves as process and as outcome, and the expansion of the determinants and logics of political reason to the infleshed, the embodied, the ancestral, and also the figure of the grandmother or the abuelas as key in this, and therefore a centering of internal defense, recuperation of the territories of self, the territories of community, and the territories of land and livelihood. And so what we can see here is a politics weaved in the plural of life to contest and transgress the politics of anti-life, which is the hegemonic dominant form of political economy of contemporary Colombia and across the globe. So I hope that opens up some nice conversations and questions and dialogues. I have this piece written up if anyone wants to read it in full, because it also talks about the role of the masculine raced subaltern subject as part of this, DecolonialFeminisms, and I've also got lots of works on the role of the pedagogical here and the infleshed and deep time. So please contact me, share your ideas, reflections and your own work so that we can deepen our dialogues across and between lands here in so-called Australia to support our healing decolonial liberations in thought and deed and body. Thank you.